welcome to the first Learning Now television of February 2021. Nigel, what's on the show?
It's a good show, Kate. I think if we wanted to give it a headline, we'd call it Thriving in COVID, or Amidst COVID. That's what I would call it. And we've got Andrew Barnes. He's the founder and CEO of Go1. It's actually an Australian company with more customers in the US than Australia. And they've got a brilliant idea, which is brokering learning content from an enormous number of suppliers. So you just pay once and the learning is there for you. Plus Lucy Whitehall, she is a positive psychologist and she's focusing on coaching and basically staying positive amidst all the chaos. And finally, we've got our normal, regular contributions from Robin Hoyle, and Martin Cousins shares a new research report. So lots to look forward to, and I think lots to celebrate this time, Kate.
And don't forget, Don Taylor is on not once but twice. He's spoken to us this month.
Indeed he is, yes. Once about the Learning Technologies Conference and once focusing on the Global Sentiment Survey. So everything to play for. Press the button, off we go.
Enjoy the show.
It's the beginning of the new year, and for the last 8 years in a row, I've watched and waited for the annual sentiment survey, which is the issues that most traumatize, interest, stimulate the L&D community globally. So Don Taylor, thank you so much for joining me. Don is the chairman of the Learning and Performance Institute and the brains behind this survey for the last 8 years. So Don, 2021, what are the changes year on year? Is there anything you want to highlight about the sentiment survey this year?
As you might expect, this year, because the survey takes place from November, goes through to January of the next year. So it starts on beginning of December through to end of January. Right at the end of the year of pandemic, this is a year when we've seen a huge amount of change in the survey results, and it's all down to learning and development people, as far as I can see, reacting to COVID-19 and shifting their priorities as a result.
So what did you notice? What has come out through that reaction?
Okay, so a bit of background first. So the way the survey is run is, the idea is to get a quick pulse check. What's important to learning and development people? And to do that, I ask one question which can be answered very quickly. The idea is you can do it in 1 minute. That question is, what will be hot in learning and development next year in 2021? There are also actually two voluntary questions which I've added this year. One is, where do you work? And that's a multiple choice. And there's also, what are you going to change about how you work as a result of COVID-19? That's a text-based one. But ultimately, it's a one-question survey. 3,114 people answered from 95 countries. And the big change is that for the first time, the new option, which I put in this year, reskilling and upskilling, went to number one. And it didn't just go to number one marginally, it got the greatest number of, or the greatest share of the votes of any number one option since 2016.
Yeah, 13%.
Yeah, 13%, which is extraordinary. Yeah. It was also number one across each of the 4 areas of work that I've asked people to describe themselves as: self-employed, a vendor, workplace, or education. It was also number one in 5 out of the 6 of the regions of the world that we were in. So the exclusion in South America, that's a quite small number, just 170 odd people there. So that could be a sampling error. So essentially the world of learning and development, at least the respondents to the survey, agree the most important thing is reskilling and upskilling. So that's the first thing, and I'll come back to that in a second.
Yes.
The second thing is that because that came in at number one and it was so popular, every other option was pushed down the survey, apart from, notably, collaborative and social learning, which came up from last year's share of the vote by 1.1% to be number 2. Now, this has been on the decline since in fact, it's been on the decline since 2014 when I started the survey. It has been number 1 for a couple of years. It's been on its way down. And so something has happened to boost it back up. The only other things that held strong and were in the same position on the survey in terms of the share of vote was coaching and mentoring, performance support, and mobile delivery. Now, I think what's interesting about that is that what you're seeing is what we saw in the survey this year was a real drop in the popularity of things which were less sure. New technologies, new methodologies. Curation, which has never been very popular, unfortunately has been on its way down, took a further steep dive down. Artificial intelligence was the greatest loser this year compared with last year. Virtual reality, augmented reality was a loser again this year. And so is personalization. Personalization is something everyone would like to do, but they can't quite get round to being able to do it. So all of those suffered this year. The things that won out are the things that L&D feels sure of. And top of that list, of course, reskilling, upskilling, which basically is our job, training people to do their work better, either at their existing work or a future job.
Excellent. That's absolutely fascinating. It seems logical. It makes sense to me. There's nothing you've said that I frown and think that's weird. And what it seems is that the emphasis is on helping people. So it's a people-centered result, isn't it? The collaborative and social learning, the reskilling, upskilling, helping people stay relevant, the coaching, the mentoring, all of those things are really, really strong. If you add all those together, you've got kind of almost a third of the entire percentage of responses.
You're right. And that is exactly the conclusion I've come to, is that there's a shift away from the technology focus we've had so much in the past on the survey, much more towards the human side. And for me, the coaching and mentoring thing and the collaborative and social learning really stands out for that. And part of that is that people have seen these approaches work during lockdown, whereas they probably found personalization a bit difficult to even think about when most people who respond to the survey have been flat out trying to just get L&D to work in very difficult circumstances.
So it's almost like a luxury that they can't quite justify at the moment.
I do think so. I think there's
sorted.
I think there are two groups answering the survey. There are the people who are the absolute innovators, and they want all the latest stuff. And there are the people who are the early adopters who are a bit more pragmatic. They're still keen to know about things, but they don't want to spend time on stuff that isn't going to come in on budget, on time, and sort a problem for them. And those are the things which are getting supported this year.
Yeah. It's absolutely excellent information, really. I think that there's a lot of good stuff in there, even though it's a list. It's a list that reveals a world, really.
So yes, there's an awful lot you can get from it. I mean, I do wonder sometimes. I don't ever want to overplay the background to this. It is a sentiment survey. It is one question. It's designed to be answered quickly. But if people do want to know more about the survey, of course, they can go to the URL, which I'm sure you'll have in the show notes, Nigel, which is donaldhtaylor.co.uk/GSS to get more on the results of the survey, the report itself.
Don, it is appearing on the screen as you speak.
Fantastic.
It's a serious point that people should go there. No one's being charged to this. You can download it.
True.
You can not only look at the list, which is all over Twitter, you can actually read the analysis. And the analysis is always thoughtful and useful and adds another dimension to the raw statistics, if you like. Don Taylor, I really appreciate this brief but important interview just to alert people. If anyone hasn't seen this survey, for goodness sake, where have you been? Look at the list, but then go to the website, download the report and read the analysis. Don, thank you so much. Thanks very much for your time. Appreciate it.
I'm thrilled to welcome our next guest. Lucy Whitehall is director and owner of Transform and Thrive and was introduced to us by friend of the show, Dr. Hannah Gore. It's always a pleasure to meet a friend of the family, as it were. So Lucy, welcome to Learning Now TV.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here, Kate. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Now, Transform and Thrive, people could probably guess maybe part of what you do from the name, but if you could enlighten us a little bit, that would be great.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. I'm a positive psychologist and master's level coach. So I spend my days helping individuals and organizations to thrive in their personal and professional life.
Now, I imagine that you've been quite busy in the last year with everything that's going on. Obviously, I mean, there's been a kind of a trend towards understanding mental health and well-being over the last few years, but obviously that's accelerated within the last 12 months with the pandemic situation. I mean, I don't even know where to start really. I'm assuming that has had, quite a big impact on pre-existing clients and potentially new people that you're working with.
Yeah, absolutely, Kate. So I've been working in the employee wellbeing space for over 20 years now, and never have I seen it so active as in the last year. And I think that has been because we can't ignore it. Employers, leaders, they can no longer ignore well-being as an absolutely integral part of the performance of their organizations. And so, yes, work has been very busy. And the work that I do is predominantly with groups and also with individuals. And I'm usually working with people who are working in very fast-paced environments. They're professionals. They're working long hours, even before the pandemic hit. And some of their behaviors have been unhelpful for their well-being. Working long hours, tendency towards burnout, perfectionism, these sorts of areas are quite common in the work that I do. But we've certainly seen that last year has completely accelerated the need for not just therapeutic support, which isn't my area of specialism, but coaching support.
So how do you help some of these leaders kind of work through what they're doing in order for them to then help their people?
Yeah, well, I come from a point of view in terms of my coaching that is very much about the person themselves having all that they need already within them. So my role really as a coach is to provide a really psychologically safe space for whoever I'm working with to really unpack what's concerning them and what their hopes, their dreams, their challenges, their fears, all of that gets unpacked. I work very deeply with my clients. So my work is involving a lot of thinking time, a lot of space and time to really explore. It also looks at a compassionate stance, so looking at self-compassion work. So I don't really work with people on the surface and give them the answers or solutions. I don't believe that is my place to do that. They know themselves and their people better than anyone does. And so my role is to walk alongside them, to guide them and support them in a way which really enables them and empowers them to find their own way forward. I think it's very easy for us to look to gurus, mentors, coaches, thinking they're going to have the answers, when actually we usually know it inside ourselves. But for some reason, we're holding ourselves back. We maybe have assumptions or beliefs that have been long held and are no longer serving us. And my job is to help dismantle that in a way which is compassionate and safe and supportive rather than accusatory or difficult.
I think something that is fascinating, and we touched on a little bit before we started filming the interview, is around this notion of learning. So, I mean, obviously we're on Learning Now TV, and something that we talk a lot about where I work is the sort of getting away from just the pure content delivery, and that actually learning is a cycle that includes feedback, reflection, all of these good things. And, do you feel like that balance flips because you're tending to work with senior people? So actually it isn't about them necessarily taking an online learning course or, attending a virtual classroom session. Actually, their learning is done in that kind of slightly less structured, the coaching environment. And do you think that is something that, I don't know, should maybe trickle down, or, everybody should, because what you said about having a safe space, I feel everybody needs that.
Yeah, well, I totally agree. Everybody does need that. And that's what I've noticed. I've been coaching for about 13 years. And I have noticed more and more as I've worked with professionals at all levels, actually, is that what most people need, we forget that we're not just professionals or C-suite people or whatever hat we wear. We're human beings. And we live in an extremely distracted world. When do we ever get the opportunity to carve out valuable time to think and reflect in a way which is completely safe, where we know that we're not going to get shot down by someone else or interrupted, or our job isn't at risk, where we know that we're allowed to do that and we're not going to be judged? More and more, the people who come to me, they want that time to think and reflect, because that is how we learn. We learn through reflection on what's worked, reflection on our challenges, reflection on what we can do differently, reflection on our strengths. And we just don't get the time. For whatever reason, we don't get the time to think and reflect in that way and in that space. That, I believe, is what we're lacking, and what I try to fulfill as a coach is to create that for people.
And would that be some advice that you would give to organisations and L&D professionals to maybe talk about with their teams and managers in their organisation, is to try and carve out that space or that time?
Without a doubt, the research is really compelling in the area of reflection, and I'm not saying anything that's new. We know that reflective time is something that is hugely valuable to people's ability to learn and grow as a person and professionally. There's no doubt about it. And increasingly, when I'm working with groups in organizations, I'm facilitating workshops which are simply reflective workshops, where we are having a series of questions that we approach in a reflective way. And I'm creating that for them. So they want that. Organizations want and need this more than ever, particularly, I'd say, after last year, when organizations were just doing a lot of doing and not a lot of actually stopping, looking, celebrating what they've achieved in a global pandemic, and then thinking about, okay, what do we do next? What direction is right for us now?
And I think we're in an interesting time, especially with the sort of the change in the calendar year now. There is this sense of like, okay, we stuck some sticking plasters on. Mm-hmm. Everybody can work from home. We know it's sort of feasible and it's kind of working. And then, we know we can give them content and we know we can do certain things, but actually starting to build that. And from a digital point of view, obviously you've had to adapt your own business. I mean, is it things like, clearly, things like Zoom and Teams are being harnessed for these sorts of coaching conversations. What have you seen anything else around, like, WhatsApp groups, or, that's been a personal lifeline for me, throughout all of this. Is that something that organisations are starting to introduce?
I see some of that. I see lots of different systems like Zoom and Teams and all the other platforms that are out there. I literally have lost count of the ones that I've been involved in the last year. I'd say it's probably up to 9 or 10 now. I think the channel is actually less important. And I'm sure people who are tech specialists might argue with me about that. I think it just needs to happen. And some of the best reflection that people do, we're limited on doing it now, but is actually when they're walking with other people. So some of the best work I do when I'm coaching people is where they're on a walk, they've got their earplugs in, their earbuds in, they're on the phone to me, and we're doing a coaching session in movements. So they're doing their reflections that way. And I'm noticing more and more that people are doing that within teams as well. When they're on their hour's daily walk, they're actually having a reflective session with one of their team members, with one of their colleagues. And so just a simple phone call with movements just ignites the thinking.
So what would you, for busy L&D department, or, a busy manager trying to kind of pep their team up, is there kind of a single piece of advice or something that you would give them from your reflections on the last year? On
my reflections on the last year is to keep going with connecting with people. One of the big challenges we've got at the moment is how people are feeling so disconnected from other human beings. And that's ironic considering that we are online all the time. I'm talking about meaningful connection with people. So human beings are social creatures, and we're seeing a real rise in loneliness at the moment in all age groups, particularly the 16 to 24-year-old age groups, interestingly enough, which these are the people who are always connected to other folk, but we're talking about meaningful connection. So my advice always is around who do you meaningfully connect with on a daily basis. It's not about number, it's about quality of connection. Who understands you? Who can you laugh with? Who can support you? That's what's important for us at the moment.
Lucy, it's fantastic. And I feel like I get so much energy from talking to people like you, and that helps me get on with the rest of my day then. So thank you so much for coming back onto Learning Now television, and if you come back again and maybe share some more reflections with us, that would be absolutely fantastic.
Thanks, Kate. I'd be delighted to.
DPG's online courses are designed to fit around your life, so you can study anytime, anywhere. Get in touch now for more info.
We're not ones to tackle the small questions on this show. No, it is the big, meaty stuff that we like to get into. And this month, regular contributor Robin Hoyle asks, what is the purpose of learning and development? Let's find out.
I was asked the other day what I thought the purpose of corporate learning and development was. And I thought that's an interesting question. And as a result of that conversation and subsequent thinking, I thought it was worth kind of just setting down where I think we might have got a little bit confused and where maybe there's a lack of clarity about what the purpose of corporate learning and development is. So the first thing to say is by corporate, I mean it's working with employees of an organization. That doesn't mean you have to be an internal learning and development provider or partner. You might be an external provider of learning and development services, but fundamentally you're still working within that corporate space. The second then is to think about the difference between learning and development. And we tend to think about it as one thing, don't we? Learning and development is one thing. I'm going on some learning and development. Well, we're not really. We're either doing learning or we're doing development. Yes, there's a crossover somewhere, there's kind of Venn diagram there. But fundamentally, I define development as being about the individual's career aspirations, the skills and experiences that they need in order to progress within their career, to move to the next space. Now, that might be somebody coming in apprentice level, brand new to the organization, looking to secure a full-time permanent job within the organization. They've got certain skills. That's their development process. It might be somebody who's a new graduate or somebody who's been spotted as part of your high potential talent program, and they're doing some development activities. And many of those development activities, whether apprentices or high potentials or graduates, will be work-based. They will be gaining experience to different ways in which the organization operates in different places sometimes. And of course, that experience is really useful, but it's not a formal course in that sense. And a lot of the development activities that we do may be supported by formal inputs, but a lot of the activity happens on the job, in the workplace, exposure to new ways of working and new opportunities to apply the skills that we've got. The learning piece, though, is very often designed not from the perspective of the career of the individual, but from the perspective of the strategic goals of the organization. It is about the corporation saying, we want people to be able to do these things in this way at this standard. And typically what we find is that there are 4 criteria which may be used to determine whether or not a learning intervention is required. Sometimes that will be about underperformance. So we've got people who are not doing things in the right way, not doing things at the right level, not understanding what the standards are that they've got to meet, and that might be a learning requirement that we have to address. It might be about change, a new initiative brought in across the organization, whether that's a process, whether that's a way of working, whether that's moving into a new area of the business, a new market that we're exploring. So we want people to do things differently and do different things within a new environment in order to meet the strategic goals of the business. That's possibly a learning opportunity there. We may also have some inconsistency, and we want people to do things the same way, whether they're in Birmingham, Basingstoke or Burnley. We want them to do things in the same way if they're in Manchester, Manhattan or Mumbai. So we want to share experiences and come up with a way of doing things the same way and consistently into a consistent standard across the organization, because that's necessary for our strategic goals. And then finally, there is opportunities that we're not yet taking. That might be about providing services to people who are hard to reach. It might be about new markets, new opportunities to sell more to people, might be just better ways of delivering services to people and customer service to people so that they get a better experience of interacting with our organization. So 4 areas there around underperformance, consistency, lost opportunities, or change, which might have a learning intervention requirement. And notice that emphasis on might. It's not true that every time we see one of those situations that the answer is, let's do some training. And I use the word training because, let's be absolutely clear, I remember when we all did search and replace and remove training with learning. The role didn't change, just the terminology. And although we've got a little bit better at understanding the difference between the two, fundamentally from a corporate perspective, the distinctions are not always that clear. Training and learning, broadly speaking, the same thing. Training is what the organization does. Learning is what the people who are on the other end of it do, we hope. So when might it not be a requirement for us to organize some kind of formal input? When is that not our job? Well, the other purpose of corporate learning and development teams is to analyze the requirement and put forward the best solution to the situation that they face. So what is the barrier in terms of underperformance, lost opportunities, inconsistency, or change? What's stopping people from doing things in the right way at the right time to the right standard? Sometimes it will be their capabilities. It will be that they just don't know what it is that they should be doing or how well to do it or what good looks like. But other times it might be resourcing, it might be the amount of time that they've got, it might be about the way that they're being managed and different priorities and mixed messages coming from the management. And we can look at whether or not a comms process is necessary, or whether or not it's about reorganizing work, or whether it's about spending a bit more money on some more equipment or even more people to enable us to plug the gaps that we've identified. But where it is a learning requirement, and the learning requirement is focused on people being able to do different things and do things differently, then we can start to focus on, well, what is it that we're going to do as a learning and development team to enable those people to have those skills and to apply those skills? And if we don't know what the application of those skills looks like, if we don't know when, where, how, and how well people are going to do these things, then we don't have the basis for designing a learning input for those people. We have to be clear on what it is that we want them to do, how well we want them to do, and in what circumstances. So our job is to gather that information, to do that analysis, then to design the solution, then to socialize that solution with the organization and get the buy-in from different places, and then, and only then, to jump into the delivery piece. And the delivery piece needs to focus not just on what happens within the classroom, the virtual classroom, or the e-learning module, but most importantly, what do people do differently when they go back into the workplace, and how do we continue that support there? Because the purpose of corporate learning and development is to positively impact the performance of our people. So if we don't look at what that performance is, how well it's being done, and how it could be done even better, then we're not fulfilling our core purpose. It's not about training delivery. It's about performance improvement. How do we get there?
Maybe we'll do that later. Hey, so you can see, this is just like using a whiteboard in a classroom. And then you do my 3-year-old's favourite, you just have a nice little wiggle. 1, 2, 3, rate it now.
A really quick question. You might want to answer this later.
You see, I love this.
I'm delighted to welcome Andrew Barnes. Andrew's in Brisbane, Australia, and he founded a very interesting company called Go One in 2015 in Brisbane. And he has an illustrious pedigree himself. He was a Rhodes Scholar, so he joins the likes of Bob Hawke and Bill Clinton. He's got a doctorate from the University of Queensland and knows his stuff about technology. What is it about Go One that no one else has got?
When we started Go One in 2015, we saw an opportunity to really connect this sort of wonderful, diverse, but very fragmented world of corporate education, corporate training with organizations and employers looking to deliver that training out to their staff. So the insight that we had that seems to be really resonating with the market is to work to bring together this diversity of content. And we do that not by creating content ourselves, but instead by licensing and pulling content together from thousands of different providers. And so you can sort of think of us in a roughly analogous sense to sort of like a Spotify for corporate education.
How do you mediate and add value to the unbelievable amount of choice that is available out there?
Yeah, they're definitely the two core pillars of our value proposition. One is, number one, have that choice. And so you can sort of imagine we've now got over 100,000 different courses from providers such as Harvard, Skillsoft, edX, Blinkist, Thomson Reuters, so many others. And but a key part, as you are identifying, is helping people find that needle in the haystack. And the right content for a given organization or a given person can be quite different. And so what we identified is, imagine you're a nurse in London. The content that's relevant for you is going to be very different to an accountant or a lawyer or a teacher. Not only that, but if you're, say, that example, that nurse in London, and you compare that with the nurse in Singapore or Sydney, the content itself will be very different due to those different geographies and jurisdictions. And so there's a number of elements in our platform which seek to make it easy for individuals and organizations to find and discover the right content for them. But we ourselves don't presume to be the subject matter experts. So we've taken a very conscious decision to utilize the data and the insights that our users generate, that activity on our platform generates, to inform those recommendations, as opposed to pretending that we could possibly understand or be the subject matter experts in such a diversity of fields.
So it gets better and better the more people who use it, is that right?
Correct. We definitely have a team of data scientists who work on machine learning models very similar to Netflix to power those recommendations. But it's definitely those signals from user interaction that helps inform our recommendations. What we also do, though, is we partner with domain authorities who can signal what the right piece of content is for a given industry. So, for example, there might be an industry body that oversees continuing professional development. Say it might be the law society of a given jurisdiction. Those organizations can use our platform to designate which content they would recognize as being credit-bearing or worthy of CPD. So again, we just give those tools to the market to signal what is a great piece of content, as opposed to having our team in some sort of in the background pretending that we can be the masterminds around it ourselves. We definitely see the appeal of the model that we're doing, and we think it's the future. Whether it's Go One or another business that is successful in the space, and we're certainly leading the sort of movement, so to speak, at present. You can sort of imagine 20 years ago, if you're looking to access music, you'd go buy a CD, you'd buy an album, and you'd have that direct relationship with the music label selling it, so to speak. And now we probably more often consume music through a provider like Apple Music or Spotify. And so we definitely think that in the world of corporate education, where there's such a diversity of different topics. It's a very rapidly changing environment that the model we have where a HR manager or an L&D director or an organization or individual can then have that diversity of choice within one subscription is definitely a really appealing one.
It's almost like it's a process of digitization. It's a process of the changing environment. And in many ways, the marketing models lag behind the technology, so that even in the early days of iTunes, for example, you had to buy an individual song or an individual album, and you paid for it, and you either rented it or you owned it. What they realized very early on, because Spotify, I think, went there first, was that why not give everyone everything all the time and let other forms of decision-making come to the fore? So, I have Apple Music, I get my weekly, daily playlists, I get We Think You'd Like This, unerringly accurate often, stuff that I've never heard of. And it's going to be the same. So it's almost like the development industry is catching up with the digital reality of where we are today. Is that a fair statement, or is that a bit over egging the cake?
I think it's a fair assessment, and I think not only is it convenient from a procurement perspective, I think what it also does is it reflects the environment that we're in, where the needs around skilling are changing. And so you can sort of imagine that the sort of current status quo where there's a lot of cognitive load and effort to sort of think about and sort of centrally plan and manage an L&D strategy, and sort of imagine that the sort of reality for many organizations right now is to sort of have to think in advance, maybe 4 years in advance, to go, what are the number of individuals within my organization who need access to topic A, how many seats should I buy of topic B? And then in 4 years' time, there might be other topics, other sort of compliance requirements, other skills that need to be developed, which a priori are not possible to possibly predict. And so I think that model where you have access to this evolving catalog across multiple providers is particularly appealing in an environment of change, because when that change occurs, that's automatically something that's part of the offering cropped up, whether it's around GDPR compliance or COVID-19, then our customers immediately had access to those without needing to purchase a or purchase a new from a new vendor. It was just immediately available. And there's many other different examples, like obviously mental health awareness is a really important topic. So we've seen a lot of activity from organizations delivering that training where, again, 24 months ago, it may not have been front of mind.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I've run a big learning and development operation, and I had to have scouts who went out to seek stuff for me because there was no other way of getting resources. And it was timely, time consuming, it was slow. And often we still missed big things that we shouldn't have missed. And it was embarrassing when we missed stuff. So the idea of one place where it just sits up on your desktop and reminds you and nudges you is very, very useful.
You can sort of think fundamentally when we started the business, what we wanted to do was be really aligned with the incentives of the organization and the L&D manager. And so what we didn't want to do was have our own content, which we would then spruik and then sort of have sort of perverse incentives around pushing content A over content B. So we don't do that. We're very much agnostic and can recommend content, and knowing that it will not cost any more or any less for the organization. The other thing which we've not touched on, which I thought I'd add as well, is we're also agnostic in terms of how an organization looks to deliver that content. We provide a very simple, lightweight platform to access it as well, but we also fundamentally believe that the future of learning and development and how we access resources to upskill and to train out our teams will be in a mix of different applications. And so if an organization is using Microsoft Teams or Slack for communication, then you can embed learning content within that environment. If you've got a learning management system or an LXP, so that might be Edcast or Degreed or Docebo or SuccessFactors or something else, our content will appear in those environments. So it's very much thinking about how do we make it simple for an organization going, whatever content is right for that company, for that industry, but equally then making sure that it fits in with their incumbent systems, fits in with the future strategies and applications that they're looking to deliver as well.
I congratulate you. I think you've done an absolutely excellent job. If people haven't heard of Go1, they will do. And I hope that those who haven't heard of it will begin to explore it. But in the meantime, let me thank Andrew Barnes, CEO, founder of Go1, for getting up very, very early in the morning in Brisbane to talk to me. So Andrew, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, Nigel. And as you mentioned, it's in the morning here, so I've got my coffee. It's been a pleasure to talk, and thank you for the discussion.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
Regular viewers will recognise our next guest on Learning Now Television. It is none other than Don Taylor, Chairman of the Learning Technologies Conference, amongst his other accolades. Don, thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here.
Now, you have come on to talk to us about the Learning Technologies digital experience. Ooh. Now this,
LTDX, yes.
LTDX. Now, this is the first time in my whole career that I have not had a Learning Technologies physical event to get ready for in January. So it's very strange not to be thinking about plug sockets and exhibition halls. So how is this different? How are you kind of recreating the LT vibe online?
I was hoping you were going to do that, Kate, and now I know you're not doing it. I'm lost. No, we're creating the vibe by doing the same thing. We're bringing together great speakers from throughout the world. We're getting people together, and we're trying to make sure, as always, with an LT event, online or face-to-face, that we have lots of interaction, people chatting. So keeping the session short, 45 minutes, making sure that people can turn up, getting a great cadre of speakers together and dealing with the stuff that people really want to listen to. Now, we will, of course, miss the physical getting together. We'll miss the bars, the chats. We'll miss those corridor conversations. As far as we can, we'll try to make it possible for people to spend time in chat rooms and elsewhere conversing with each other. And where possible, and speakers want to, they'll invite people to join them afterwards for a session, which will be in their own Zoom room, for example, which is not part of the conference. But that'll be like saying, well, we finished the session, come with me, and let's go and have a chat in the corridor or over a cup of tea. So, no, it's not the same as being physical, but we'll get as close as we can.
So tell us how it's slightly different to, for example, the summer forum, because it is running quite differently, isn't it? There's German and French tracks.
Yes.
And then there's some stuff that's free, and then there's some stuff that's paid for, and the platform kind of, facilitates a lot more interaction than just Adobe Connect would on its own.
We've got 2 weeks. It was 2 days face-to-face, 2 weeks of online stuff in English, 1 week of French and 1 week of German, running at the same time. And yes, we have a paid-for session, paid-for a series of events, which is 30 sessions and 40 free events, which are sponsored events, just as you would on the exhibition floor. You'd have people in the theatres talking about the latest trends that they're observing. And that's how it's different from LTSF, because we haven't had multilingual stuff before, and we're trying to get away from the idea of having an intense conference where you've got 5 sessions a day for a few days, spread it out, give people a chance to dip in, dip out, and not get too exhausted.
Yeah, which is great, and like for people with busy diaries, that's got to be helpful, right? And then so
is your diary busy?
Well, it's fairly busy. is yours?
No, it's empty. It's empty. I'm doing nothing.
Busy for the
Nothing at
next
all.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
So topic-wise, what's cooking? Obviously, we've been through, a year like no other.
Mm-hmm.
What's the impact of that been from a kind of headline subject and topic point of view?
Well, what we're seeing with this is a different set of trends. It's very easy when you're organising a conference to focus on the immediate stuff. And some of the immediate stuff, of course, is how have you reacted to COVID? But I think we don't want to foreground that, because that's something which everybody will have in their minds, but it can't dominate everything. So what we're doing is trying to look beneath the surface. What's changed? How's that affected how we're doing our work? And what can we learn from it? So we're looking at professional development. We're looking at data. Of course, that remains hot. Engagement. That's a theme that's coming across quite a lot in a lot of the talks, the need and the methodologies you can use for engaging people. Tools, technologies, of course. Design's always something we have there. We've got Connie Malamed talking about design, which is always great. We've got, of course, program implementation. So that's a few case studies talking about what they've actually done. And that will reference COVID, but it won't be the main thing necessarily. And of course, the future of L&D, speculatively talking about the future of L&D. And in fact, that's what we have launching the event. The first session is, of course, Fosway talking about the learning ecosystem. So that's both future of L&D and its tools and technologies.
Fantastic. Okay, so I thank you very much for coming on and talking to us about that. I know the details will be popping up on the bottom of the screen. Well, we'll see you again soon.
No, always a pleasure to be here.
Our learning experiences unlock potential, transform the performance of people and organisations, and help millions around the world build happy and successful careers. We change lives with evidence-based learning that works, sparking real change for real impact.
It's about time we started looking at another research report. And for the first report in 2021, Martin has chosen a very interesting production from the CMI. And the CMI's report is called Management Transformed, Managing in a Marathon Crisis. And no points for guessing what the marathon crisis is that we're managing in. Martin, why did you pick this report? What struck you in it?
Well, because managers are really important. They have a hugely important role in supporting teams, and they have an even more important role supporting them through crisis times and also remotely, which is something new for managers and new for teams. It's still relatively new, rather. So I think no one in L&D would say managers aren't important in terms of the efficacy of learning. There is a role here to be played. And I think any research report that gives us some insight on how that role is changing and how learning professionals might better support managers is worth our time. So that's why I've presented you with this one to kick off 2021.
Good, I think good choice. And I think that there are a few main conclusions, and they are important, I think. First one is about productivity isn't about where you work, it's about how you're managed. Yeah. And in some ways, if you just took that one on board, that has got some very interesting ramifications across organizations. The second is about communication. There's a whole lot in the report about good communication, empathetic communication, and so on. And the third is about culture as a key to engagement in a crisis. If the culture is strong, or you can strengthen the culture, you'll get through the crisis much better if you've got a very weak and fragmented and inconsistent culture. And the final one is about inclusivity. You need to be committed to inclusivity right through the organization. And again, what this crisis, if we can call it that, has done is not necessarily create anything new, but just accelerated those things which were already there. And if there was a small crack, it's turned it into a large fissure. So, Martin, what struck you in detail about the report that you want to draw our attention to?
Well, I wanted to look at the traits and role of the manager in the year ahead. So this research kind of highlights some of those traits and some of the kind of future roles that they have to play over the coming months. So the traits, the top 5 traits are: communicates clearly, listens, provides clear direction, motivates, and is responsive to change. So they're the traits. And the top 5 behaviours are ensuring staff well-being, supporting staff with their work, providing leadership for their team, ensuring staff remain physically safe from COVID, and setting the direction of their team. Now, if you wanted to benchmark your managerial support and development support for the year ahead, then this would be a useful report to look at, because it's basically listing out all the areas where managers need support. Those 10 that I've just mentioned would be an obvious place to start. Now, those 10 traits and roles for the year ahead show that managers have got an awful lot on their plate. And I do wonder whether this kind of research should be leading organisations to really think hard about what the manager is there to do, especially when supporting well-being is the number 1 role for a manager in the year ahead.
You're quite right. You're quite right. I also think, Martin, that it appears that this report is loading new stuff on managers, but not suggesting that old stuff is removed to create some space. And you can't have an organization where the well-being of staff is prioritized, but the well-being of managers is ignored. Therein chaos lies.
Yeah. And I think you've got to be really careful, because lots of organizations are looking to managers to really keep an eye on the work, right? So, and this research is quite interesting because it shows that people are just as productive if they're working out of the office as if they're in the office. What really matters in all of this is trust, and that comes out as a theme in this research.
What you seem to be saying, Martin, is that trust is pretty fundamental to everything that this report says. It's fundamental to productivity, fundamental to well-being, fundamental to staff retention, fundamental to people working remotely, feeling part of the organization, so it's at the heart of culture, etc. Does that seem to come out of the report as well?
So I think, trust is really important, as you say. The research shows that people are just as productive working outside of an office as long as they are trusted to do so. And I think that's quite important for the future role of the manager, because if that means that frees some time up, then maybe managers can start to do some of the other really important things that this report is suggesting they need to be doing, like supporting well-being. I'd also add that empathy is a huge part of this. So that comes through very strongly in the research, that managers need to be empathetic and employees want them to be empathetic. And that fits well with the whole, I think, just supporting well-being, really understanding how your employees are. And there's one final element that I would pick up on, and that's communication. Because people asked what they miss about working in an office, and a lot of the things are to do with just the interactions. So the challenge for managers is, well, how do you keep a really good flow of communication so that people feel involved and engaged and know what's going on? Because they're remote and you have to work harder at that. So how can you support managers to become better and more effective communicators in a way that fits with the team? So this stuff, it feels quite basic, but it's fundamental. And I think that's where learning teams can really help right now, by supporting managers in developing those fundamentals.
It's fundamental and it is complex, but there are tools that you can use. For example, not everyone is naturally empathetic or even curious about people. They don't register the emotions coming on someone's face. They just take everything face value. But there are questions that you can learn off by heart, if you like, and ask. There are ways of interjecting. There are ways of reinforcing. All these things are taught behaviors that can be learnt and applied and create an environment which makes people feel at ease and feel that they can trust their manager. Because as we just said, if trust doesn't weave its way through all of this, then organizations are going to be in serious trouble. So basically, Martin, what you're saying is that there's some very useful indicators here. It's very simple. There's nothing incredibly complex, but there's a difference between saying trust is important and actually raising the level of trust in an organization. And that's where L&D come in. So therefore, they ought to be reading this report and coming out with some ideas to implement its outcomes, while at the same time working on strategies to balance the workload of managers and not see them and their fault if the organization gets in trouble. That is unreasonable, I would urge and suggest. So Martin, you can see on the screen where it can be downloaded from. As all of our reports, it's completely free. And I think you'd be missing a trick if you didn't download it and read it. So thank you very much for drawing it to our attention.
Thank you.
Well, that's the end of the February programme, and I hope you feel a little uplifted by a whole string of good news items, really powerful. So, any conferences, Kate? Are we still keeping going with our online conferences?
Powering through, Nigel, online. So next week is the Learning Technologies digital experience, easy for me to say, that Don talked about earlier in the programme, 15th to the 26th of February, still time to sign up. 18th of February, you can live stream the Learning Awards to your home, maybe get dressed up and have a glass of champagne while you do it. And then looking ahead all the way into May, but it's a big one, 3rd to the 14th of May is the Learning Solutions event from the Learning Guild in the US. But the exciting thing, I suppose, and the positive aspect of COVID is that a lot, it's going to be online, so the likes of us get to go to it without having to travel.
Yeah, I think so. That there are some great advantages that learning technologies last year, which was face to face. I don't know how many people at the conference, a few hundred. There'll be 6, 7, 8, 9,000 at this event coming up. So that's great. That's opening up access, creating opportunities for people to learn way beyond anything you could hope when you have to kind of shoehorn people into a specific space. What about the rest of the program, Kate? What did you enjoy? What did you like best? Not best, but what did you most enjoy?
All best, all our guests.
All best, yes, of course.
I really enjoyed my conversation with Lucy Whitehall. Just the sort of carving out the time and space to reflect, thinking about how important, reflection and coaching is in the learning cycle. It's that getting away from the shoveling of content and the kind of the distribution of content. Those conversations and that time to reflect is so valuable. And what she talked about, just even, rather than doing Zoom calls all the time, just putting your headphones on and doing a walking meeting with somebody, so you're walking and getting outside. It's just a simple thing, but I think it's the little things that, are the saviours at this, strange and difficult time, especially in February when it's dark. So, I felt really energised and uplifted after I spoke to her.
That's great. And she's right. I'm no longer self-conscious about apparently talking to myself as I walk through the streets. People sometimes give you slightly strange looks, but hey, you're wrapped up in a world of your own. And it is much more pleasant to have a conversation outside than to just be sitting more and more and more in the same seat in the same corner of the room as you have been for over a year. So I think that's right. And I was also impressed by Andrew Barnes. He set up Go One, and he's doing really well. And he's got a unique idea that no one else has even begun to pick up on, which is, why not just pay one subscription and get everything you want rather than 26 different ones? So it's a simple idea, but it's beginning to get some real traction around the place. And Martin's research report, this one, that with the focus on what's gone on over the last year, a kind of reflection on leadership in the last year has been very, very interesting and useful. It's time to kind of look back as well as look forward, I think. We need to pat ourselves on the back at what has been achieved, as well as, feel slightly depressed that we're still not out yet. But it's going to be a brighter day, I think, on the way. There's kind of cracks of light on the horizon, I think. And today's program seemed to reflect that, for me anyway.
Same. And when people sort of, I'm on the phone to people at the moment or doing Zoom calls or what have you, people say, how are you? And I always say, I'm still here. But, that's a positive. That is a win. And it's not like, oh, I'm still here. It's very much a positive, and there are reasons to be cheerful. And spring is around the corner. So, let's crack on and get through the other side.
On that happy note, thank you, Kate. Speak to you next month.